in an organization the size of the UN or the WCO or even the WTO, the majority of the member nations are developing countries. And that means whenever there's a new project, if you raise your hand and you agree to be the pilot, the costs are usually covered. And even if you're not the pilot, if you're one of the first wave, you may get some funding from one of the development agencies.
Hey, folks, we're in for a great show for Simply Trade podcast today, and this is going to be a really good discussion. Folks, this is going to be one that you really are going to need to listen to. And as we get into this, with all the reciprocal tariff talks, higher tariffs, lower tariffs, they're going to take effect, then they're going to be postponed and all of that. There's going to be country of origin issues because of enforcement. There's going to be valuation talks. There's all kinds of things that we're looking at. Well, in the midst of this, we're going to be talking to somebody today, Lalo, that he's one of the sharper tools in the shed, I would say. So I'm looking forward to having this discussion. But before we get going too much, what's the latest on everything for us as far as the show? Is like we've had, of course, the summertime, people are hitting vacations and stuff. I'm hoping that people will listen to this one, especially because when they get back, there's a lot of information we're going to talk about today that they need to hit. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. I guess people going on vacation might put their listening on hiatus for a little bit, but then all of a sudden we see little bumps, probably people catching up, binging 2 or 3 or 4 shows at a time or whatever. So that's always good to see that we have a loyal listener base who will go back and listen in and try to catch up on anything that we might have put out there. So thank you all for doing that and coming back and listening to our previous episodes, even though you might have been away for a bit or so or whatnot. So,
well, as it turned out, is that I kept saying that his name looks familiar, and as it turns out, we actually were working both at FedEx at the same time for a little period there of his career, actually in the same building on the same floor, and he was right down the hallway, kind of a thing. But we're bringing on Greg Pilkington. Greg is one of these guys that has a phenomenal career that is really diverse, Greg. And I will say that you and I dealt with you on things through email and through, indirectly, because there would be reports that I know that you had written that I was having to take. And I had a group at the time that was probably, I had 21, 22 professional consultants, if you will. It was a group within FedEx that were most of them licensed brokers, customs brokers, that we would deal with our top U.S. importers and with the CPA program, as we call it, customized processing accounts. And all of that is that we had to stay up to speed. Your stuff was up to date. I mean, you were great. You were clear. You knew what you were talking about, and all of that. And unfortunately, I got to say, we just never did interact. But Greg, you've worked for a couple of the biggest express carriers out there, and as well as you just mentioned the World Customs Organization for a while. You're now over in Europe. And have been over there for many, many, many years. So all said and done, I got to say, it's an honor to have you come on. And actually, it's like, I'm just tickled pink, honestly, is that you're on the show, but it's just how our lives have kind of intersected there. But anyway, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, guys. And look, the feeling's mutual, like I said, to be invited to the Simply Trade podcast after watching so many episodes. The thought never crossed my mind that I would be sitting in this chair across from Andy and Lalo today, but I am glad and excited to be here. There's a lot of good stuff we need to talk about. Absolutely.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I did want to ask Andy, I guess, it's just me and my curiosity is that, Greg, you seem to have a little bit of a twang, I guess, me being a me being a Latino and on the border here in Texas, I don't feel like I have an accent, but people always say you have an accent. I was like, okay, well, and I can hear a little bit of a twang. And you've been in Germany for 20 some odd years. Kind of curious. Where are you from? How'd you get here? And let's just start there, and then we'll do a quick little. Just a quick little intro to who you are and where you come from, and then we'll get into the topics if that's okay with both of you.
Sure. Well, I think I sound like a news reporter. It's very neutral, but I am from Charlotte, North Carolina, so somewhat of a hillbilly. I did my master's degree down in South Carolina, and I might have picked up a little bit more of an accent down south.
Well, it's one of those things where it sounds good to me because you're talking normally. So I love it. Hey, Greg, talk a little bit about your career real quick. Is like because most people have not gotten into when they grow up getting in, especially with the way the express mode of transportation developed. But talk a little bit of where'd you go to school? How'd you get into this industry and where you're at now?
Well, let me speak to those who are in their early 30s and struggling with where they might be in life right now, because that's where I was. I started out in the restaurant business, and in my mid 30s, I had 4 restaurants and 2 children, and I had to make a choice. And of course, I went with the children. And that's how I got into logistics. My father worked for a trucking lines in the South, in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I had worked there in the summers after, during high school and during college. And so in my 30s, I went to a career counselor. They said, you need more education. Long story short, I went to get my master's degree at the University of South Carolina. And while I was there, I started working with the South Carolina Export Consortium and really fell into the export-import business. And having been in the trucking business for the 10 years previous to that, I really didn't want to change careers again. I just wanted to develop the logistics, because at that time, this was 1999, we were dealing with Y2K. Amazon was exploding. We were coming up with concepts like landed cost engines, et cetera. And it was becoming very cool to be in this space. And so that's how I fell into it. And I got the job with DHL in Brussels. That's when I originally left the States as an expat in 2000 to deploy what was then called Trade Automation Services. It was a web front end that we could use some basic information to develop a landed cost quote, because we had so much material that was being refused after folks found out how much duties and taxes cost. And that's going to come back in the current environment. We're going to have this discussion again. If you don't accurately predict what those landed costs will be by stacking the duties and tariffs, you're going to have a lot of refused shipments. And that's how I got into, the customs side of it. Very quickly when I was at DHL, the WCO had started their WCO data model 1.0 exercise. And I had a PhD intern who had a connection at the WCO, and we loaned them the DHL data model. And that's what was used to influence at least the first version of the WCO data model. And so that's how I learned about the WCO. Long story short, I went from DHL to FedEx, where I was for a year and a half before I was appointed by the Secretary General of the WCO to be the administrator of WCO. My title was Executive Officer of Budget and Strategy, but I served as the administrator and worked with the Finance Committee and the directorates in the strategic planning of the organization. And I did that until 2016, and I've been now back with DHL since 2019 as the head of global customs programs, where I sit in between the business and IT.
Wow, what a career. The thing, too, that is interesting that with the WCO, when you were working there, My interaction there is I've had off and on different topics over my career, but in particular, I was dealing with the ATA Carnet, or as they would say in Europe, ATA Carnet. And we were looking at developing the electronic or digitize the ATA process. And sitting in on a series of meetings with the WCO, with their directors that came in that were on that committee, it's like dealing like with the United Nations kind of a thing. It's like each country were posturing. And it was interesting because we had done a lot of work and all that, and I was involved with that from the U.S. perspective. Along with several people from other countries that we were dealing with things. And so now we're coming in, we're doing a presentation with it. But the thing that I found interesting was, again, the posturing of some of the countries trying to be the first to start, testing it out when they weren't even close to being ready or didn't have a system, but yet they were, lobbying other countries or dealing with things or posturing. And I'm like, good night. This is like herding cats here if we're going to make some progress. So did you see that kind of stuff, that as you were trying to move something through with the programs, did y'all have to do a strategy on how to try and move things over or through to make progress without letting it become, I hate to say the word political, but I mean political from a standpoint of posturing with one country versus another?
Well, I think absolutely, because look, the dynamic is, especially in an organization the size of the UN or the WCO or even the WTO, the majority of the member nations are developing countries. And that means whenever there's a new project, if you raise your hand and you agree to be the pilot, the costs are usually covered. And even if you're not the pilot, if you're one of the first wave, you may get some funding from one of the development agencies, right? One of the development banks, or, there's a lot of international aid out there now. Well, there was until recently. USAID supported a lot of it, but a lot of that funding's now been cut. But that's where a country would come in and try to jockey, if you will, for a front position, because they knew this funding was going to come from the development partners and that they wouldn't have to go back to their ministries, their home ministries, and try to find the funding for this kind of, especially something as important as EATA Carnet. I mean, EATA is, that's Formula One, that's football clubs, that's all the, high value, exactly, all the cool stuff, right? And if you can't do that, you don't get the cool stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was amazed by that. So as you've gone through this now, it's with the talks of, the Trump administration now and with the U.S. all that going forward with a lot of reciprocal tariffs. I know that over the years, there's been this, where everybody has wanted access to the U.S. market. But then when U.S. tried to go the other way, it was, U.S. goods were not necessarily treated fairly, and there were higher tariffs on things. On the flip side of that, there were, things that U.S. was flexing its muscle at times, and, it was like the 800-pound gorilla and all that. So I know there's always these trade talks. It's like, depending on the perspective, hey, this is not fair, or, and you look at the other side, well, no, it's not fair because of this or that. With all this, and there's just change. The thing that we have to look at in the industry, whether it's compliance, whether it's logistics, whether it's, marketing and you're trying to sell, and all these things are coming into play. We just have to wind up being adaptable and deal with them. I've seen a lot of people that are just continually, complain. It's like, quit complaining, get to some solutions. What do you do? I see right now with the issue of tariffs and trying to negotiate trade deals and whatever, there's also going to be an element of enforcement. So where do you see right now, as far as from a European perspective, What are people saying there or whatever? Are they dealing with things? Is it where they're coming in, settling in, going, not sure how it's going to play out as far as the trade negotiations, but yet are there some essential elements that people need to look at as far as making sure are accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Let me preface this by saying for the audience, just so you know where I'm coming from, I support 13,000 colleagues that clear roughly 1 million shipments a day. When I say I've seen it all, I see what you're doing. I know what you're doing out there. The goods description is the first place to start. There is no real law that says what a good goods description is, other than if a customs officer reads that line item, they should know beyond the shadow of a doubt what's going to be in that box when they open it up. If you put samples, if you put textiles, if you put something like that, you might as well just go ahead and put the red flag up and say, open me, inspect me, slow me down. I'm not going to be delivered anytime soon.
I think the most abused description is parts. I always tell people, if you're saying parts, is that auto parts, computer parts, or chicken parts? It makes a difference on how it's going to get cleared and who's going to be involved.
Absolutely. And look, in today's world, nobody's doing this by hand anymore, right? Your local customs broker's not doing this. He's running it through, or she's running it through auto classification, machine learning. They're training classification AI agentic agents to do this. Nobody's doing this by hand anymore, right? Except where you need to do it for the first time and you need to get it right, right? And so the description, number one, you got to have a good description, right? And you need to know what it is, right? Because that description is what's going to drive the HS code, right? We need to have that HS code, and you, especially as a shipper and the receiver, want that to be perfect, because that could be the difference between a 31% duty rate and a 0% duty rate, right? Just one number, right? If you don't get that all the way down to the 10 digits perfect, that's the difference, right? And when we talk about stacking, that's 31% on top of whatever else is coming, right? So you want to make sure you get that HS code right. Now, most people know this and are doing it. Well, I say most of the regular professional shippers, right? But unfortunately, in an Air Express environment, we have a lot of ad hoc shippers. They only ship maybe once or twice, a year, so they're going to get it wrong probably every time. They're just going to have a hard time getting it right. But where you ship regularly, you should have no excuse for getting it right. Now, the most important, I think, from the U.S. context now, and there's a lot of discussion around this, is the rules of origin. And if you don't get the rules of origin right, because as we all know, we've all seen the boards in the press conferences with the country and the duty rate, right? If you don't get the country of origin rate right, you're going to be paying a very high duty potentially. Or you're going to be paying a low duty that you will then be obligated to later, along with fines and penalties, to rectify that duty that you paid too low of. So I think it's probably a worthwhile conversation to talk about rules of origin and making sure that, you got your rules of origin understood, especially here. You asked about Europe. We require country of origin at the line item level for every shipment, regardless. There is no exceptions. You have to have a country of origin.
So far we're talking about the description is key and paramount, and then obviously the country of origin, and then thirdly on that would be the appropriate value on that. Definitely don't try and undervalue something just to kind of scoot by or save yourself, because it'll cost you more in the long run if it's not a valid thing. That's one thing a lot of people think, well, I can just put, especially when people are abusing it, I can just put, $50 or I can just put $100. It's like, no, what's the true value? Because in today's world, systems can very quickly check, well, here's this commodity. What's the industry value going right now? And you look at it, and if it's way off, you're going to be in trouble and get flagged for an exam. And then from there, it could be like the snag on a sweater if you're trying to circumvent things, don't you think?
Well, we have a whole undervaluation and intellectual property rights infringement program internally so that we can try and catch as much of this stuff before we actually submit it. And it's surprising. Look, Andy, what you just mentioned, I remember sitting behind a customs officer in the old days, and what would they do is they just go to Amazon, right? You said it's $10. They go look on Amazon. If that's not what Amazon said, that's not what you're paying. If Amazon said it was 100, you're going to be paying 100, right? I mean, that was that straightforward. They don't even have to do that today with AI. They can just run it and it tells you what the range should be, right? And they don't even have to go look for it. The report spits out, this is not within the range, right? This shipment's been flagged for undervaluation. Now, unfortunately, some jurisdictions are struggling to catch up with the delivered duty taxes paid. And when the online marketplace collects the duties and taxes and includes that in the shipment transaction, a lot of commercial invoices don't have a place to carry prepaid duties and taxes. And so what happens is I pay $200 online, but then the invoice only reflects, like 170, 175, right? And so customs says, well, this is undervaluation. And I tell you, going back to your point about don't try that, because what they're doing, and we see this in a lot of jurisdictions, we have to contact the receiver, and the receiver has to provide a proof of purchase. Right? So not only are they getting that commercial invoice or that proof of payment from the shipper, they're asking for reconciliation from the receiver, and they will check. They will do the math.
Well, and that right there is like, if you're ordering things, if it's a business to business and all that, folks, listen to what Greg just pointed out. It's one thing to have, and these commercial invoices are basically used. You're making a declaration, if you will, to customs, to the government, and if that information is not accurate, then you're going to be in trouble. So here's the other way to look at it. A lot of folks struggle, sometimes even with the customs clearance process, even though it's becoming less demystified, or it's becoming demystified, I should say. In the process, but in the overall, this would be like you're making a declaration of your income tax return every day or every shipment that comes through. So it's like, okay, this is what I've made for today. And you make that declaration like you're doing an income tax return. You're making a declaration to the government. If that information is not accurate, then you're going to wind up with some more problems. Well, same thing with the shipments here, is that if that information is not accurate, and there's a lot of details in there, then you got to make sure you're crossing the T's and dotting the I's, or customs will come back, they'll do the audit, and just like you said, they're going to verify, hey, what's the proof of purchase here? And if that doesn't match up, then you're going to be into deep yogurt, if you will. And keep in mind, if you're doing a DDP transaction or delivery duty paid, that's where the seller is selling the goods and delivering it to the end customer for the X dollar amount. You better make sure that your declaration matches whatever you're selling it for. Now, you on your commercial invoice can then go and deduct the amount of duties and taxes that are in there and deduct your transportation and whatever. But when you're selling at DDP, that's one of those things you need to show. Here's your information, and it better match up or you're going to get in trouble, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And we see that quite frequently, right? Is that a lot of, especially the smaller shippers, and this is kind of what caused the situation with the low value shipments into the U.S. The customs officers there were just overwhelmed with the amount of poor data, and they couldn't do their risk assessment. Look, risk assessment from a border protection standpoint only has a couple of touch points, right? We can't see the shipment. We can't touch it. We can't, use any of our other senses. The only thing we can do is look at the data. If the data is not perfect, that's the anomaly that customs is looking for. And in today's world, when you can go online, you can use any chatbot to figure out what your goods are. There's no reason for you not to have a good description and to have a good HS code and to know the country of origin. And if you don't do those things, that's the first red flag that says, hey, maybe these guys are up to no good. Maybe we need to look at this shipment, right? If they can't even take the time to do their homework, to ship it with the correct data, maybe there's something more to it. And this is no different than other forms of law enforcement, right? The reason why, like in the US, if they see you driving with an expired tag, you could just be forgetful, or you could just be an unlawful person, right? And that's why then they're going to check to see, well, is this just a forgetful person, or is this person up to something else? They use one anomaly to trigger the inspection to find other infractions, if you will. And if you look at the numbers that are already coming out of the U.S., the tariffs are only the majority, but they're only a portion of the revenue. The rest of the revenue is coming from the fines and penalties from not following the right duty declaration, right? And we're going to see that, especially now that we've introduced this complexity out of Vietnam. Is it Vietnamese origin? Is it not Vietnamese origin? Do I pay the 20%? Do I not pay the 20%, pay 40%? Do I have a non-preferential certificate of origin that would support it? And I still have to pay the 40% because U.S. Customs says this might have Chinese origin goods in it. These are the kind of things that I think are really slowing trade out of these markets and into the U.S. And until there is some clarity, we're not going to see the brakes come off.
Yeah, well, and the impact there is where, folks, let me take a little side thing here, is that, there were a lot of Chinese origin goods that were being, components, whatever, and being moved to factories in Vietnam, in Malaysia. And I think out of $1 billion that was seized in, I believe it was 2022 or 2023, I think, only about, 100 million of it was out from China directly. There was like 375 billion that was coming out of, or 375 million, was coming out of Vietnam, and the other part was coming out of Malaysia. And so there, to your point, so that gets back to that country of origin, where just taking different components, it used to be, okay, let's take the bicycle scenario there. You take components of a bicycle, and, you got the tires, the rims, you got the frame, you got the seats, you got the handlebars, you got the chain, you got the pedals, and all that. All that could be manufactured in different countries. It comes together, and let's say that it's being assembled into in Mexico, first example. And so the issue there would be that by themselves, it's a bicycle pedal, or it's a pedal that could be used on different things and all that. Yet, when all those items come together, there's a substantial transformation, and it becomes a bicycle. So no longer is it classified as a tire. It's a bicycle with parts thereof, if you have accessory parts. So in saying that, the country of origin would have been Mexico, because I've made this bicycle in Mexico. The problem is that now it's no longer just Mexico. You have to take it a step further and break it down where the country of origin is for some of these other components. And like you were saying, if there are Chinese components or components from other things with these additional tariffs, I'm not sure how all this is. There's dust in the air. Everybody's trying to figure out, well, here's what it's going to be. And you talk to somebody else, well, no, this is how it's going to be handled. There's a lot of confusion, as you just said. So once you talk to that right now, is like, if I'm in a company and we've got, parts that we're buying from a vendor in Italy or in, Singapore or whatever, what is it that they should be looking at? Is that, all right, country of origin would have been Singapore. Well, now you got to take it a step further, don't you?
Yeah, so let me just preface this by saying, unlike, and we talked about this a little bit offline, unlike the Technical Committee on Customs Valuation, there really are no global rules for rules of origin. And so you really need to go to the jurisdiction that you're shipping to or from and know the specific rules, because there is no, like the WTO's customs valuation, you have the 6 methods of valuing that transaction. There is not a correlation to the rules of origin. It is specific to the regime. So that's the first thing, right? And if you're doing this and you got lots of different parts, I mean, let's kind of lean into tariff engineering, right? If you wanted to do tariff engineering per se, you need to have a product master file. And in that product master file, say for product 1, your widget, if you got, say, 10 different components from 10 different countries, and one of those countries has a 50% duty rate, tariff engineering would tell me I need to look at that one component and see if I can source it from somewhere else, because that could lower the cost, the overall cost of goods for that one product. Now, if you have multiple components that are coming from multiple jurisdictions that have high duty rates, maybe you can source it domestically, or maybe you need to go back to the drawing board and see if there's another part that we can replace this with. So, for example, and I see this a lot now, where you see steel and aluminum, and sometimes we don't even think about this stuff, right? You got belt buckles, right? You're having to declare steel and aluminum in belt buckles these days. Fashion houses don't want to do that. You know what? Steel and aluminum won't be in belt buckles anymore. We're going to replace it with something else, right? That doesn't have a 232 tariff on it. That's the kind of behavior, unintentional behavior. And you can take that, apply that across all different kinds of products, right? These products will be changing in front of us because of the tariff implications, right? And tariff engineering. And so that's what companies need to be doing, right? They need to know the rules. They need to know where this product's coming from. It's no longer acceptable to say, in the past, even in the general entry summary in the U.S., you can select origin unknown. But if you do, you're basically saying, I want to pay the highest rate I can.
I was going to say you're going to get hit with the very highest of the.
It's the equivalent, right? So if you don't know, and look, going back to how does this correlate to the HS code? You had 2 HS codes come from two origins, same exact HS codes, but one's going to have a 60% duty rate and one's going to have a 10% or a 0% duty rate. It's pretty obvious you need to know the country of origin, right? So for the product master file at that level, you need to know the component parts so that you can switch those things out. And if, Canada comes in at 35%, which this is what we're hearing now, you can look at different options, right? But if you don't have that functionality built into your product master file, if you don't have a sourcing tool or some vendor that you're working with that can do these kinds of, and I know Altana's built something recently. The international organizations have TINA. You can do tariff simulations. If you're not out there doing that already, you're behind the wheel. I mean, your competitors are. They already have, I can tell you. And they're already changing some of these sourcing patterns, right? The Asia to Asia, inter-Asia, the Asia to Latin America, anywhere in South America, all of that's increasing. While it might be decreasing into the U.S., these other lanes are growing.
What would you suggest that, getting, through some of our discussion, I'm sure there's some folks that are like, okay, you've got my attention now, but from an executive leadership role, what would you suggest as far as actions or questions? Hey, they're not necessarily the compliance person. They're trying to run the company. They're trying to have the vision. They're trying to look at things and look at the markets. Can we penetrate it? Can we sell more? Can we do more? What would you recommend, Greg, as far as the actions an executive should take in pulling some things together, especially like what you just said? If you're not running those scenarios, how do you get where do they need to go to start pulling that together?
Well, first I have to make a confession. Nobody likes customs, right? That's how I got into this role. Nobody else wanted the job, right? And I often use this story. Look, even Jesus got a hard time for eating with the tax collectors, right? So we've had customs has had a very bad name for a very long time. But it is the the mechanism, if you will, for making global trade work. And if your boardroom doesn't have at least a chief compliance officer who's at least familiar with customs brokerage or how customs work. And I don't care if you're a makeup company or you're making widgets, whatever you're doing, you need to have a customs expert. In today's world, it's no longer a back office functionality that you can hand off to, some junior. This is now strategy. And if your markets depend on global trade, and there's a lot of people who have different opinions about globalization 1.0, it's struggling right now, right? So if you want to maintain your market share in these foreign markets, you need to be nimble. You need to be quick.
Well, I will say that one of the things too along those lines is, as you just said, strategic, is having a representative from your purchasing or sourcing group, from your logistics, from your compliance. And I'm talking import-export compliance, your systems, your customer service, of course, your legal and all that, but and literally doing some roundtable discussion. Well, what do we hear? What do we know? Well, this is what's going to happen. Like, for example, you just mentioned, and this is what it means to be nimble, is that, okay, there may be a 35% tariff levied against Canada. Well, if that's the case, what's the impact? Do we have anything going on there? All right. Yeah, we have this component or this issue. Or having that team effort, then it's like, okay, what are our alternatives? Don't know, but we'll have to do some homework. Okay, get to it. Let's come back tomorrow. Let's come back in a couple of days. This stuff is happening so fast that there's no longer this issue of, well, let's just talk about it, think about it, whatever, and it may take, a few months. We're talking days. We're talking almost it's changing by the minutes. So you've got to have your team pulled together and having those discussions and all of them working together rather than in their silos, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, this is where you need to understand the implications. It just goes back to, product design probably doesn't, your folks who are doing product design, they don't even know what a tariff is, right? They don't know that if they design this product with a different component from a different source, it would drop our cost of goods sold by, 30% maybe, right? And that's why you need to be, the customs folks need to be talking to the design folks so that you can make these kinds of on-the-fly decisions. Because that, 6 months ago, this didn't matter. That's how fast this world has changed. Now it matters where you're going to source those components from, because it matters if you're working on less than keystone margins. And even keystone margins are not sustainable with the kind of tariff rates that we've seen, right? Where you mark something up 100% and then resell it. I mean, at a 60% tariff rate, you might not even be able to sustain that, right? So that's why you got to be able to make these kinds of, and look, in some cases, that's, when we talk about product design, a lot of small manufacturers especially don't have that kind of knowledge in-house, right? They go out to specialist designers, et cetera, and you got to wait in the queue. And so there's, lead times for these kinds of, mass changes to your market. And then, you got to go out, you got to find another producer, especially if that producer was doing it for you in China. And that's not easy either to machine up these factories to get them ready to go or find another factory that can replace that. So there's significant lead times.
Well, I was just going to say, we're going to need to wrap up here, Greg, on this. We could keep talking because there's a lot happening. And actually, I hope that you will come back because there's some more I'd love to for us to, Lalo and I, talk all the time and looking at it. What's the perspective right now of like European companies that, since you're right there in the middle of it and all that. And there's some things that we could get into for the future. I will say one of the other things, though, is as we're talking, these executives need to be probably looking to find out who does the import-export compliance in their company on their products and make a point, not go through your normal check, go by and find out where they're at and just drop in and see what's going on and watch and see what's at. Find out what is it they're doing because, they're pulling their hair out. they're probably so overwhelmed, they need some additional staffing. So it's not one of these things where you can keep just, from a budget perspective, everybody's asking questions. Can you imagine those compliance people in your own company probably need a lot of help, especially more from a clerical perspective, so that the people with the knowledge are freed up to go and delve into what's going on and bring them to the table for those strategic discussions.
Yeah, if you haven't already done an audit on your export operations or import operations, be it whichever or both, whichever it may be, to understand what these changes mean to you, you need to do that ASAP, right? You need to understand. I think there's especially a lot of MSMEs that are going to be impacted. The numbers that I've seen out of the U.S. Chamber was somewhere, if they stay in place, around 5 million small businesses will be impacted before the end of this year, right, based off these tariffs. And that's at the current rates. If they don't go any higher, if they go higher, obviously more small businesses. The bigger guys are where there's higher margins on higher cost goods. So, for example, if I'm selling something that's 200,000 or 300,000 euros, and I'm only paying, or dollars, and I'm only paying, say, $50,000, $75,000 for it, I might be able to absorb that 50,000 or that 50% markup on the 50,000, because I could even maybe pass that on, depending on, how critical. And we're talking about pharmaceutical industries now and medical facilities. So not everything will be impacted the same way. It's going to impact lower cost goods more than it will impact higher cost goods. And that's going to hurt.
Well, Greg, I appreciate your comments. This has been a great discussion. Lyle, I'll tell you, this was great. I'm glad your team, got Greg in. And as it turns out, he and I worked close together and didn't even know it. But all that to say, folks, I'm going to tell you, this has been good. Like us, share us. Thank you for your support of the show. This is one that you need to go back and probably listen to this again, because Greg has given a lot of good detail here. And Greg, I'm hoping that we'll have some more shows with you, because you just scratched the surface on this.
Oh, we could do this for a long time, Andy, and I'm more than happy anytime. Just let me know.
We'll just don't be surprised if we show up there in Germany and do it live, though. So
we can do that too. I know some nice little places down in the Moselle. It's about 30, 45 minutes from here. We'll go find you a spot.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, folks, listen, we appreciate you. Thank you so much for all the support. And with that, we're going to go ahead and sign off and let you all have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show, or would like to sponsor Simply Trade, or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only, and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.